can we explain intuition? We may know it by other names, like gut feelings, hunch, inner voice, inner knowing. Science tells us that there are even brain cells in our gut, and I'm going to be talking about that later. Throughout history, there have been references to intuition and all sorts of explanations of it. And the following are just a small sample of those. Plato in Republic defined intuition as a fundamental capacity of human reason to comprehend the true nature of reality. Descartes considered a more rational approach, referring to intuition as pre-existing knowledge or discovering information through contemplation. I like that. In the 1930s, Jung defined intuition as the psychological function that explores the unknown and senses possibilities which may not be apparent. He described this as an instinctive apprehension. Jung believed that knowledge through intuition presented as whole and complete without rational explanation or knowing of how this information came into existence. He referred to instinct or intuition as nothing other than God. In 1964, Arthur Koestler wrote in The Act of Creation about the act of intuition being considered to be a moment of truth, the sudden emergence of a new insight. Koestler cited many examples of great discoveries which occurred through unexplained moments of insight. For example, the mathematician Carl Friedrich Gauss, in a letter to a friend about the proving of a theorem on which he'd worked unsuccessfully for 4 years. He talks about it by saying, "Without a hint of painful effort, not so to speak by the bright grace of God, as a sudden flash of light, the enigma was solved. For my part, I'm unable to name the nature of the thread which connected what I previously knew with that which made my success possible." The phenomena of sudden knowing is not unusual and is well documented. Albert Einstein was said to have discovered the theory of relativity in a sudden flash of insight. He wrote, "The intellect has little to do on the road to discovery. There comes a leap in consciousness, call it intuition or what you will, and the solution comes to you, and you don't know how or why." As the study of intuition has developed, the issue that has received the most attention in recent years is, where does the intuitive content come from? Is it our own unconscious, a deeper or higher inaccessible self, a higher power or prior learnt buried knowledge? In 1992, Herbert Simon, a scientist and Nobel laureate, wrote, "Intuition is nothing more and nothing less than recognition." He referred to this as storing of information, as chunking, where over time patterns are observed and accumulated. You watched a documentary and you remembered it, but not quite. And when a small detail is recognised, it's associated with a larger composition, also known as pattern recognition. Suddenly you remember everything. Where did this come from? The theory was that this mechanism evolved for survival, to recognise danger quickly. And as women reared the young, they particularly evolved this ability. A recent professor, Michael Gershon, in 1999, wrote in his book, The Second Brain, that the human gastrointestinal tract contains approximately 100 million neurons. The gut-brain connection has been well researched, and we now know that a multitude of feelings originate in the stomach. We may feel information rather than know information through the mind. Gary Klein, who wrote Intuition at Work, 2003, wrote about intuition being the pattern matching process that quickly suggests feasible courses of action. Recently, psychologists defined the recognition prime decision, the RPD model. This explains how faster decisions are made without having to compare options under time pressure, high stakes, and changing parameters, thus intuitively choosing feasible solutions which they already knew. The RPD model is seen as a blend of intuition and analysis. I've mentioned a few of the many theories that have been explored over the years in the arena of Newtonian science, where all things are governed by rational and measurable laws. In the religious and Eastern philosophic perspective, intuition is considered very differently from the trend amongst the scientists. The felt information has a more mysterious quality, as often the information can't readily be explained. Many non-scientific traditions attribute intuition to a higher being or place of consciousness, which is usually unavailable but accessed through the mind. Knowledge through intuition by prayer or contemplation or silence is from this other source. Within Zen Buddhism, intuition is seen as a mental state between the universal mind and one's individual discriminating mind. Bankai, an 18th century Japanese Zen teacher, called the source of his intuition the unborn Buddha mind. I think that's beautiful. In Hinduism, it's believed the Atman, the individual self, soul or spirit, is only realised via intuition, through which the Atman is then guided to the final goal of self-realisation, and intuition is the voice of God. Without the awakening of intuition, the ego or the reasoning mind is all that's present. The process of developing the ability to connect with the knowledge, to the extent the self merges with this knowledge, is the spiritual journey of self-realisation, self-actualisation, also known as enlightenment. Whether intuition is the voice of God, brain cells firing in the gut, chunked unconscious memories regurgitated, what matters to healers and practitioners like you and me is how we can use this faculty, the ethical issues, if it can be developed, and if there is a deeper source and not our own mind, how do we determine the difference? In the next tutorial, I will be looking at the history of medical intuition.